So I wrote a story about my brother and how he meant the world to me. I was very happy at first, after having my story published, to be seen by many, many friends in the US and in the UK who read my story and they were moved by my words. So we decided to do something about it. We decided to create a platform for youth and refugees in Gaza to write their stories in English in order to defy the Western media narrative about Palestine, in order to defy the Western media narrative about the people in Gaza and about the casualties in Gaza. So ever since, we started to train writers from Gaza and link them up with international mentors to help them write their stories. One of our co-founders, his name was Rifat Al-Ar'il. I'm sure you all know about him. On the launch event, on the launch of We Are Not Numbers event, Rifat Al-Ar'il came and he gave the first speech. And his words still echo in my mind. And he said, he told us a story actually, he told us a tale. He said, when the colonizers went to Canada, two of them were fighting over a piece of land. And then a native Canadian came to them as a judge. So he asked them one question. He said, if you truly own this land, tell me your stories. Because if you do not have stories, then you don't truly own the land. because the stories is the evidence that people live in these lands and have and own these lands. And that was a defining moment for me. The Palestinians do own the land in Palestine, and they have stories to tell to you. So when We Are Not Numbers, over the past 10 years, we have recruited over 350 writers from Gaza. We paired them up with international mentors from all around the world. And we did tell the story. We did tell the story of Palestine over the past 10 years. We Are Not Numbers, we did not only write the stories about the bereaved people, about the killed ones, about the siege, about the lack of electricity, about the troubles that we have in Gaza, but we told the story of Palestine. And these faces, these writers, have written about everything you imagine for We Are Not Numbers. They did not only write about the hardships, about the suffering, about the trauma in Palestine. They wrote about peace. They wrote about love. They wrote about resilience. They wrote about power. These faces that you see here, these stories that you read here, are the embodiment of our right to the lands in Palestine. They are the stories. They tell the stories of Palestine. So thank you very much for coming. Our stories, we write our stories not only because we want to amuse you or tell you tales, but we tell you stories because we want to show you the real voices, the real people behind the numbers that you often see in the news. Because the Palestinians are not numbers. Thank you very much.
I would now like to quickly introduce our next speakers, John and Nick, the wonderful mentors at We Are Not Numbers. John Metzen is a former landscape architect and teacher. He taught for 3 years in West Bank schools and universities and has long been involved in the Palestine solidarity movement. Nick Appleyard is a communications advisor. He's a former journalist, having worked as a reporter for a range of media outlets, including The Guardian, The Independent and Yorkshire Post. Please join me in welcoming John and Nick to the stage.
Well, as we've just heard, the main purpose of We Are Not Numbers is expressed in its name. It helps us all to understand that the people of Gaza are so many individuals just like us, and they cannot be reduced merely to statistics of casualties, of unemployment, of malnutrition, and so on. This is more important now in this terrible crisis that Gaza is going through now than it has been before. What is happening in Gaza so easily becomes normalised. The recitation of numbers killing home the horror of what is happening there. And I think also that the passage of time, more than 6 months now, has had the effect of blunting our apprehensions and feelings about what is happening. So I would just like to spend a minute or two talking about one of the young writers that I have helped to write essays and articles about her experiences in Gaza, to show what We Are Not Numbers attempts to achieve. Her name is Rahaf Abu Zarifa, and she in fact now is the social media person for We Are Not Numbers. And she was only 20 when she wrote her first article, and it was that was maybe a couple of years ago, and she was writing about her experience a few years before, in 2014, during what I think was called Operation Protective Edge. And she was talking about her own development and her growing up as a result of that war. And her discovery of what was really important as she left behind the things that had interested her as a child. She talked about herself and her younger sister, how they actually enjoyed that war to some extent. It was exciting. It meant that they enjoyed a particular closeness with their families as they camped with their grandparents in their grandparents' house. But then she went on to write another essay, much more recently, during the current catastrophe, in which she talks about her beloved cousin Mahmoud, who was a most remarkable, energetic young man, who, at the age of 21, on the death of his father, took responsibility for his whole family, and as well as pursuing his own education with huge determination, became a pillar of strength for his family and for his community, but was also tragically killed. And Rahaf talks about the effect of that on her and on her whole family. And through his example and through her own experience, Rahaf herself matured enormously. Fortunately, with her family, she was able to escape from Gaza and go to Egypt. And there, as the eldest sibling of her family, she became responsible for keeping her whole family and actually finding the means for them to live. And she did that partly through the writing that she learned to do with We Are Not Numbers. And I have since kept in touch with her, and it's been a real privilege for me to see how she has developed and matured and grown in strength and in resilience, that quality for which Palestinians have become famous and which they've acquired through immense hardship. And I have really enjoyed seeing her personal growth during this period of great turmoil and terror for the Palestinian people. And so I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, John. You're currently watching us melt on stage because it's really, really fun. I'm Nick. Real privilege to speak to you all today. I'm one of the mentors. I was asked to share a memorable experience from being a mentor with you. At the end of the night, we expect half of you to sign up to be mentors as we grow our movement, so there's no pressure there. To be honest, it was really hard to just pick one moment because there's been so many. I've had the privilege of getting to know so many courageous and resilient young Gazans, but one does come to mind. It still gives me goosebumps when I think about it. I'm going to tell you about when I was having a conversation with Noah, who's one of the writers that I was mentoring. But the one thing she was most upset about was the lack of response from the international community. It was hard to disagree with her. But I did tell her about the demonstrations that were happening in towns and cities across the world, and she couldn't believe it. So I shared some news articles with her about the marches in London here, in Washington, Paris, Cairo, and it really blew her mind. This was, remember, the time when Suella Braverman was condemning demonstrations as hate marches and trying to get them banned. So I suggested to Noah that she express her feelings about the demonstrations, those people who were marching in her name, in solidarity, and calling for a ceasefire. So Noah wrote something. I called the Guardian's comment editor. I travelled to London and arranged to FaceTime Noah from the march so she could see for herself the thousands of people that were out there. It was the largest demonstration yet, with 500,000 on the streets. I can see some people here that were there on that day. Probably all of you. Sadly, that was a note that Israel sent the grant troops weren't received. Obviously, I hoped for the best. Took some videos from the march, hoping that she'd see them at a later date. And then we waited, and we waited. Sunday came, still nothing. Just heartbreaking news reports about the bombardment that was going on as the tanks rolled in. Monday came, and again nothing. So we waited, and we waited. Then on Monday evening, my phone pinged with a series of WhatsApp messages. Noah's name flashed up on my phone. She'd survived the invasion and was hiding with her family in Khan Yunis. She'd received a letter. And alongside it, she received a video from her cousins, Bara, Jana, and Hayat, who are refugees living in Canada. They were at a similar demonstration in Ottawa, and the Canadian politician had read excerpts from her article out to the crowd, during which you can hear her cousin in the recording scream, "That's my cousin!" The great cheers from the crowd. Noah's voice was being and that's the most fun thing I Thank you.
When I stand here, I feel immense responsibility. Over the more than 40,000 stories of the Palestinians who Israel killed in the last 200 days. Whose story would I tell? Should I talk about the more than 400 people I know and their families that Israel have killed? Should I talk about my relatives as a priority? Should I talk about my beloved friends? Because I can't imagine my daily life without him. And then I think, each time I stand on a stage, I have at least opportunity to share one story. So why not to do that? Because at least someone is known at that time. There's something so important I have learned with We Are Not Numbers. It's not just how we tell stories, but that our stories is embodiment of who we are, what we do, how we lived. As people who lived under Israeli occupation for